communism, an ideology that has promised a utopia of equality and prosperity, built on the foundations of a classless society. Yet time and time again, it has left behind a legacy of oppression, poverty, and despair. From the Soviet Union to Mao's China, communist regimes have collapsed under the weight of their own contradictions, often at a devastating human cost. In the 20th century alone, most historians agree that the death toll from the communist ideology ranges from 75 to up to 90 million people. Bottom line is, communism sucks. But during the Cold War, communism wasn't just an isolated threat. It became the focal point in a global struggle for dominance. So why, despite its repeated failures, was communism so widespread? And why does it keep resurfacing? Well, the answer lies in the power of propaganda. And during the Cold War, propaganda wasn't just a tool. It was the very lifeblood of communist regimes. It became a weapon to manipulate minds, control populations, and spread ideals worldwide, turning the Cold War into a war of influence and ideology more than one of bombs and bullets. Even today, communist propaganda continues to linger, subtly shaping perceptions and ideologies, reminding us that the war of influence never truly ended. To understand how communist propaganda became so effective during the Cold War, we need to trace its roots back to the Russian Revolution of 1917. The Bolsheviks, led by Vladimir Lenin, seized power in a chaotic and war-torn Russia. The revolutionary ideas that fueled the Bolshevik uprising, equality, class struggle, and the promise of a new world order became core to communist ideals, shaping its message and appeal. Lenin quickly realized the power of these revolutionary ideas and leveraged them to solidify public support, portraying the Bolshevik regime as the embodiment of progress and reinforcing the belief that their struggle would lead to a utopian future. He understood that to consolidate his rule further, he needed more than just guns and soldiers. He needed to win the hearts and minds of the people. Thus, the Soviet propaganda machine was born. Lenin leaned heavily on propaganda to spread his ideas of Marxist-Leninism, a political theory that called for the overthrow of capitalist systems and the establishment of a dictatorship of the proletariat. The concept was pretty straightforward. The working class, unified under one communist banner, would overthrow their oppressors and establish a society without class divisions. Basically, a classless utopian society. But in practice, communism conflicts with inherent human tendencies like individualism and the natural inclination to establish merit-based hierarchies. Thus, it requires relentless control over information, the manipulation of public perception, and the suppression of dissent to maintain power and guide the masses toward the desired outcome. Lenin understood this early on, and propaganda became the tool through which the Soviet state could control not only the political narrative, but the cultural one as well. Art, literature, films, everything was harnessed to promote the vision of a perfect communist society. The Soviet people were bombarded with images of happy workers, thriving industries, and a utopian future, even as reality often painted a far grimmer picture. The goal was to create a sense of inevitability that communism was not just a political system, but the desired future of all of humanity. Fast forward a few years, and the power of the Soviet propaganda truly came into its own under Joseph Stalin. Stalin understood that to maintain his iron grip on the Soviet Union, he also needed to control not only the state, but the very thoughts of the citizens. To cement his narrative and maintain his absolute control, Stalin turned to the arts as a powerful tool for shaping public perception. Through socialist realism, a state-sanctioned artistic style, Soviet life was portrayed in the most idealized terms. The hardships of everyday life, the purges, the famines, these were all hidden beneath a veneer of progress and prosperity. Every poster, every film, every piece of art was carefully crafted to reinforce the narrative that under Stalin's leadership, the Soviet Union was flourishing, even as millions suffered. Artists were not just creators, they were tools of the state. Their work meticulously controlled to ensure that only the most flattering images of Soviet life were allowed to reach the public. This is why, when we look back at Soviet art during this era, there are such striking similarities in style, because it was mandated by the government. So while it is often said that art imitates reality, in this case, art was used as a tool to change the perception of reality. This tight control eventually led to the creation of a cult of personality, where Stalin was portrayed as a near mythical figure, revered as the great leader and father of nations. But Stalin's propaganda was not just about promoting positive images. It was also about controlling information. Stalin's regime went to great lengths to suppress any dissenting voices. History was rewritten, facts were altered, and those who dared to speak out were silenced. The Soviet people were kept in a bubble, where the only reality they knew was the one that the state wanted them to see. The strategies pioneered by Lenin and perfected by Stalin laid the foundation for a propaganda machine that would peak under Nikita Khrushchev during the Cold War, where the Soviet Union's control over information became a powerful weapon in its ideological battle against the West. While the Soviet Union was perfecting its propaganda machine, China was also developing its own brand of ideological control under Mao Zedong. After coming to power in 1949, Mao quickly recognized the importance of propaganda in shaping the new People's Republic of China. He tailored communist propaganda to fit Chinese culture, emphasizing themes of unity, struggle, and revolution. The Cultural Revolution, which began in 1966, marked the height of Maoist propaganda. Mao sought to purify the Communist Party and Chinese society by eliminating capitalist, traditional, and cultural elements. Propaganda played a central role in mobilizing the masses. The Little Red Book, a collection of Mao's quotes, became a symbol of loyalty and devotion. Red Guards, fueled by propaganda, took to the streets, attacking anyone perceived as an enemy of the revolution. The result was chaos. Schools were shut down, intellectuals were persecuted, and cultural heritage was destroyed, all in the name of defending the revolution. Yet through it all, Mao's image remained untarnished, thanks to the relentless propaganda that depicted him as the infallible leader guiding China to a brighter future. As the Cold War escalated, the battleground for communism expanded beyond the borders of the Soviet Union and China. The fight was no longer just internal, it became a global struggle for influence. Both regimes understood that to win the Cold War, they had to do more than maintain control at home. They needed to spread their ideology abroad. Communist propaganda, once used to solidify power internally, now became a weapon in the larger war of global influence. Through strategic propaganda campaigns, the Soviet Union and China sought to export their vision of communism to every corner of the world, transforming the Cold War into a war of communism versus Western ideology. The Soviet Union, in particular, didn't just export ideology through posters and broadcasts. They paired these efforts with strategic subversion, using propaganda as a tool to destabilize and influence nations around the world. To execute these covert operations and ensure the success of their global propaganda campaigns, the Soviet Union relied heavily on the KGB, their formidable intelligence agency, to infiltrate foreign governments, manipulate media, and orchestrate subversive activities behind the scenes. The KGB played a crucial role in propping up communist movements around the world, including Vietnam, Africa, Asia, and Latin America. While propaganda painted communism as the champion of anti-colonial struggles, the KGB worked in the shadows, providing weapons, training, and guidance to revolutionary groups. The tactics were diverse and sophisticated. Soviet propaganda often began by infiltrating education systems and cultural institutions, subtly spreading Marxist-Leninist ideology through textbooks, literature, and art. The KGB reinforced these efforts by placing agents in key positions within government, media, and military organizations, steering policy and public opinion towards communism. Disinformation campaigns were common. Fabricated news reports, forged documents, and staged events were all used to discredit anti-communist leaders and foster chaos, undermining stability and making communist solutions appear more appealing. These tactics not only destabilized regimes, but also shaped long-term political landscapes. In the Third World, Soviet propaganda backed by the KGB portrayed communism as the true path to liberation from Western imperialism. This narrative deeply resonated with populations who had suffered under colonial rule, making communism seem not just appealing but inevitable. The KGB ensured these movements remained aligned with Soviet interests, while the propaganda machine ensured the message reached the masses. Through a coordinated blend of manipulation and covert operations, the Soviet Union and its allies successfully spread communist influence far beyond their borders. The cost, however, was devastating. These ideological contests quickly evolved into proxy wars, leaving deep scars on nations worldwide. Nearly every conflict the United States engaged in, from Vietnam to the struggles in Cuba and Latin America, was a part of a larger battle between superpowers to control the ideological fate of the world. The Cold War wasn't just about military dominance or territorial gains. It It was a war for global influence where each conflict could shift the global balance between communism and capitalism. Just as the Soviet Union used the KGB to execute covert operations and propaganda campaigns, the United States relied on the CIA to counter these efforts. From orchestrating coups in Iran and Guatemala to funding anti-communist insurgencies in Central America and Southeast Asia, the US matched the Soviet subversion with its own. Both superpowers wielded disinformation, psychological warfare, and media manipulation as weapons in this ideological chess match, turning local conflicts into global battlegrounds. These ideological battles and proxy wars were what defined the Cold War. The struggles between communism and capitalism wasn't fought solely with military power, but through the strategic deployment of propaganda, subversion, and psychological warfare. The Cold War ultimately was just a war of ideas where control over narratives, ideologies, and political alliances in key regions became as vital as any military victory, shaping the course of global history. So, with all the chaos and destruction, the question still remains: why was communist propaganda so effective? Well, one of its greatest strengths was its ability to appeal to the disenfranchised. In the countries plagued by poverty, inequality, and oppression, communist propaganda offered a powerful message of hope. It promised a future where the common people would rise up and claim their rightful place in society, free from exploitation and want, much like the message that fueled the original Bolshevik Revolution in 1917. Another reason for its effectiveness was its simplicity. Communist propaganda reduced complex issues to a straightforward narrative of good versus evil, where the communists were the champions of the people and the capitalists were the greedy oppressors. This black and white portrayal made it easy for the people to understand and rally behind the cause, even if it meant overlooking the darker realities of life under communist rule. Even today, the influences of Cold War-era propaganda still linger. In some parts of the world, the symbols and slogans of communism still resonate, keeping the ideology alive in the minds of those who feel left behind by global capitalism. But the legacy of communist propaganda is also a cautionary tale, a reminder of how easily ideals can be twisted and how dangerous it can be to place blind faith in any ideology. Communist propaganda without fail promises a utopia, a world of equality, justice, and prosperity for all, but in reality it often delivers the opposite. As we look back on this chapter of history, it is clear that the lessons of communist propaganda are as relevant now as ever. In a world where information is power, we must remain vigilant against the manipulation of truth in all of its forms, because while the Cold War may be over, the battle for our minds continues. Have a great day, and I'll see you in the next video.